In June, two of my sisters completed a 3-week driving trip across the Western United States. And they invited me to come along on this trip, but my life is not really conducive right now to being set up to be away for that long of a period of time. So, in order to include me in the trip, they started their trip here for a couple of days and they ended their trip here. And when they came back at the tail end of their trip, we were, of course, visiting, and they said, "Hey, we want you to read this story to us." And they had taken a couple of books with them, and on the long parts of their driving, they had been reading to each other. And they had read this story, and they said, "We want you to read it to us." And as soon as I finished reading the story, it occurred to me that this might be a good story to share at this time with you. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read the story to you, but first I want to do a little bit of setup. So right now, many of us are struggling with dark emotions for a variety of reasons. Some of them are personal. Some of them have to do with things that are upsetting to us in our country. And there's just a lot of turmoil around the world. So it's quite easy to get stuck in fear, stuck in grief, stuck in despair. And so, is it okay to even be happy? Or is it possible to experience joy in these times that we live in? Right away, when I was putting my thoughts together for this talk, I remembered that there are several places in scriptures that call us to be joyful people. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who is one of my very most favorite Buddhist teachers, also is constantly encouraging people, his students, to not only tend and take care of the difficult emotions that they're experiencing, but also to tend and nurture positive emotions. So joy is one of what Buddhists call the four immeasurables. The four immeasurables are qualities found in the heart and can be developed and manifested in the world. The four immeasurables are love, joy, compassion, and equanimity. And what I find comforting is the world cannot give them and the world cannot take them away from us, because they are inherent in our true nature or our Buddha nature. So as you're listening to me read this story, allow some space for the idea that joy is inherent in us. We just need to remember to nurture it. And after reflecting on this for the last week when I was preparing, I realized I'm glad that living from a place of joy really is just another thing to practice. That it is something that we can practice, just like many of the other tools that we have learned in this community. So I'm going to read you the story now. It is a bit lengthy, but I think it's worth hearing the whole story instead of just a little synopsis of it. And this is a story that was written by Robert Fulghum, and it's included both in his book, Everything I Needed to Learn, I Learned in Kindergarten, something like that, but also another collection of his stories that he wrote. And I would say that this is a story of challenge, of division, and of people with a common vision coming together. Okay, so here we go. Oh, by the way, the first time I read this to my sisters, I did fine. The second time when I read it, when I was just practicing reading it out loud, I started crying. So you'll have to bear with me if that happens here. Though the formal study of music was not part of my education or family life, I have always wished otherwise. Always yearned to speak the language and know the customs that would give me a passport to that land across the border, separating an audience from the stage. How I wished to be able to play or even conduct, to be part of the orchestra somehow and not forever confined to a seat in the audience. In my book, All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, I mentioned my respect for symphonic music, Beethoven's Ninth in particular. In my secret life, I fantasized that someday I would rent a hall, a symphony orchestra, and a great chorale, and personally conduct that giant piece of music while simultaneously playing the kettle drum parts. About a year after the publication of Kindergarten, I received an astonishing call from a representative of the Minneapolis Chamber Symphony. The fantasy in my book had been noted. Would I be interested in conducting at least the final movement of the night? My presence would give them some useful public attention, and I could fulfill my dream. How about it? I assumed they knew what they were doing or they would not have asked. They assumed I knew what I was doing or what I would not have written knowledgeably about Beethoven. And I assumed that what I had always heard was true, that an orchestra really doesn't need a conductor. All you had to do was give the downbeat and gyrate your arms in time to the music all the way to the end and take a bow. As Beethoven in his Ninth Symphony, I had read the available literature and attended live performances of the piece. On many occasions, I had conducted it while standing alone in my living room. Of course, I could do this. On behalf of my new self-image as the legendary Fulgemowski, I accepted, and thereby set in motion a wave of extraordinary events. It will take a while to tell you, but as in a symphony, all the small parts are necessary for the whole. There were not just a few things I did not know about what I had got myself into. For one thing, the orchestra was in turmoil, in one of those seasons of self-destructive chaos that arts organizations are prone to endure. Its founding conductor had been fired by its board. Key musicians had resigned in protest. A new conductor had not yet been hired. Despite the catharsis and purge, planning for the coming orchestral season was necessarily being carried forward by an office staff who knew a lot about promotion, but not as much about me and Beethoven's Ninth as they should have. By the time the new conductor arrived, the season had been announced. He and the orchestra were privately appalled to hear about me. The conductor came to visit me in Seattle, and with gentle forbearance, he inquired, "Just how well do you read an orchestral score, Mr. Fulghum?" I replied, "I don't read music at all. Is that really a problem?" There was a long pause in the conversation. He explained that the Ninth was so difficult that most professional conductors wouldn't attempt it until they had years of experience. He He explained that in the final movement alone, there were at least 31 places where the conductor had to stop and start the orchestra with sensitive changes in tempo. He explained that the chamber orchestra did not normally include the ninth in its repertoire since they had only 26 musicians and must add players for big pieces. Not only would there be 50 musicians to lead, but there were 100 members of the chorus to conduct, us 4 soloists. Though they were all professional musicians, very few, if any, of the players or singers had ever performed the ninth. Even if they could play and sing the music, getting the group to come together as a cohesive ensemble would be a major task. He explained that while I was doing so well in my living room, waving my arms, I was about a half a second behind the music. In the real concert setting, the conductor must have the complete score in his head. In the real concert hall, the conductor must be thinking seconds ahead, knowing everything that had happened, was presently happening, and was going to happen in the next minute, all at once. He explained until he reached a mental impasse. In sum, what you want to do is so completely, he couldn't find the words. But I really, really want to do this, I pleaded. Another long pause in the conversation. He said, and I quote directly, "We are in deep shit." He had found the right words, all right. He had finally come up with a formal musical term I could fully comprehend. To his surprise, and even to my own, I was not dissuaded. But could it be done? I mean, if I worked hard enough and long enough and wanted to do this badly enough, is it possible? He replied, maybe. We made a deal. He would help me in every way he could to learn conducting in the most elemental way, which proved a little easier than I expected since clarity and simplicity and consistency were far more important than dramatics. I promised to do something I had not done since high school, to learn something by heart. To memorize the piece so thoroughly it would always be a part of me, and to translate the score into some idiosyncratic form that I could follow. We would give it 6 months. If I could pull it off, well and good. If not, I promised to become catastrophically ill a week before the performance and not show up at all. When I went to work on the 9th, I fell back on my college skills, on the attitude that says there is no intellectual task that cannot be performed between noon on Sunday and a 9 a.m. Monday class, if that's what stands between you and a passing a course. If you're worried enough and scared enough and desperate enough, you can do miraculous things with your mind. Not only could you read War and Peace if you had to, you'd even consider writing a sequel to War and Peace. Thinking back on what I pulled off to get my BA, Beethoven's 9th seemed less daunting. It also helped my morale when I learned that the first time Beethoven conducted it in rehearsal, he crashed it, never got through it. Beethoven. Learning the 9th may have been the hardest and most exciting intellectual challenge of my life. It was so impossibly absurd a thing to attempt, I could not turn away. How bad could it be? The worst I could do was bring about a hilarious debacle nobody would ever forget. At best, I could actually do it. This was a must, a crazy, unimaginable, no way out must. 1 week before the concert, I presented myself to the maestro in a nervous but ready as I'll ever be condition. We worked daily. While he played through the score on the piano, he cajoled and shouted and sang me up and down the changes. He never said it, but I believe to this day he knew I couldn't do it, and he knew I couldn't do it, but he would leave it to the disaster of the first rehearsal to speak the truth to me. This man has a Yale PhD and is a gentleman and a scholar. He also has a wicked sense of humor, so I also suspect he did not want to miss out on what promised to become one of the great comedy moments in recent symphonic history. And speaking of truth, it was only at this stage that I learned about the distemper of the orchestra. The wounds of the war over the leadership and personnel changes in the orchestra were not healed. Contract negotiations between the union and the board had not been settled. And to top it off, the season would begin with the tacky idea of a chamber orchestra doing part of the ninth with an amateur wannabe at the podium. It was true. They didn't need a conductor. What they needed was a minister. And I knew how to do that. He was a minister. By looking at the orchestra through the lens of ministry, I saw the obvious, namely, that musicians appeared to be a great deal like people I knew well. It's easy to be fooled when you sit out there in a great concert hall and these handsome, beautiful, formally dressed, talented people walk purposefully onto the stage with their shining instruments. They seem like minor gods, not a care in the world. If you go to a closed rehearsal or only musicians are present, you will find a raggedy bunch of people not unlike those you see in a checkout line at a supermarket. They have come to work, to do their job. Since they are overworked and underpaid, you quickly learn that the beautiful black outfits you see from the audience are, upon closer examination backstage, likely have to been assembled from the local thrift shops. They had children, wives, husbands, homes, hopes, dreams, and all the rest. All had committed their lives to the hard-scrabble road of the professional musician, at some self-sacrifice to the usual quality of life standards. They made sacrifices to make music. I learned that within the core group of the orchestra, there were a couple of divorces in progress, a mother dying of cancer, a family and financial crisis, some rivalries and jealousies, a drinking problem, and the tension of us versus them between the regular players and the extras hired to do the ninth. The orchestra wasn't feeling good about itself. The musicians' humanity was somewhat in disarray. So when this fool amateur conductor showed up and said, "Teach me, give me your best and I will give you mine," their mood changed from depression to amused distraction. They needed respect, and great respect was surely mine to give. First rehearsal, I stood on the podium, raised my hands, and with crazed confidence gave a hopeful downbeat, and they played. For the very same reasons that everything goes haywire at times, everything works sometimes. Like this time. It wasn't great. We stumbled and fumbled and lurched along, but we hung together and it was done. I couldn't believe it. The orchestra was amazed. The conductor was dumbfounded. Am I ready? And I was ready to pack up and go home. Once was enough, thank you very much. The thought of 3 more rehearsals and 3 performances left me limp. The conductor, on the other hand, felt rejuvenated. What impressed him was my apparent lack of reliance on the score. I never looked at it. Yet I seemed to anticipate every entrance of every instrument. I was focused like I had radar working. He couldn't believe it. That's nothing, I said. If you watch them just before they're about to play, they hold up their instruments in the ready position and you just wave at them, come on in, and they do. Thought you knew that. He was always checking the score. He never noticed. Professionals don't know everything. Well, we came to the first performance, the World Theater in St. Paul, Minnesota, a full house. Whereas I had once looked forward to wearing the white tie and tails of a maestro, I now knew enough to know such dress would only compound the joke. Holding a baton was like holding a moon rock, this item that represented enormously complicated human capability. I now knew the truth of the statement that only 10% of conducting is conducting. So I didn't look much like a conductor dressed in a business suit as I was. And I didn't come from backstage, but from out of a seat in the second row of the audience. I explained to the audience that I represented them and anybody among them who had always wanted to conduct. I apologized for not carrying a conductor's baton. Every time I had used it in rehearsal, I had thrown it into the chorus. I turned, stepped up onto the podium, inhaled enough oxygen to approach hyperventilation, and gave the downbeat. For better or worse, we were off. I felt the way a surfer must feel slicing along inside the curl of a mighty wave. My problem was that every time we came to a change in tempo, I experienced an adrenaline rush and came in waving my arms at a speed about 10 beats faster than normal. Once at a place where we were supposed to go from a slow 62 beat to a fast 3 beat, I whipped in at about 90 beats a minute, upper limit for strings for a sustained passage. We were smoking, moving like a runaway train. I told the orchestra later it was a powerful moment, a religious moment, because I'm thinking, oh my God, oh my God. And I looked down at the first cello, madly sawing away, and she's looking across at the first violin, who was likewise pumping his fiddle for all it's worth, and she silently mouths, oh my God, at him. The next day, one of our critics called the performance, Chris, we had got through the ninth in record time. Truthfully appraised, the performance wasn't good or consistent or even competent. But I, the trained seal from Seattle, had balanced Beethoven's Fall on my nose while clapping my hands in time to the music. For what it was what it was, and what the people came to see. The maestro Fulgemowski on a roll, leaving the audience feeling any one of them might have conducted at least as well. Came the final night of a 3-performance series, I was in trouble. I didn't think I could do it again. Drained, exhausted, and oversatisfied. I was also worried about the value of what I was trying to do. Us doing barely well enough to get through this thing was an insult to the greatness of the music and the talent of the musicians. Nobody had to tell me. I knew. I remembered that most of the musicians had never done the ninth before. This might be their only chance. And because of me, they would have done it only in a half-baked way. They might never know what it was like to do it at the top of their form. Now that I really knew what I was doing, how could I possibly do it? In the attic of my secret life, my committee was giving me a beating. Who did I think I was? It was a larger consideration, too. Here we were in the World Theater, about to do Beethoven, and in the theater of the outside world, great dramas had recently taken place, events that called for this music to be played. The Berlin Wall had come down. Mandela had walked free. democracy was brewing in China. We were about to play the music associated with great triumph, the Ode to Joy, played when barriers fell, when freedom came, and humanity touched glory for a moment. Music made out of Beethoven's defiance of his fate of deafness and old age. I wondered how I could possibly go through with this ego trip of mine and stumble through the ninth one more time. And yet, that's what we'd advertised. And that's what the people had bought tickets to see and hear. Right up to the very last moment, I didn't know what to do. How could I? How could I not? Hall was packed. A black tie evening. The orchestra and chorus filed on stage for one last go at this preposterous dance. The lights dimmed in the hall. I climbed slowly up the stairs to the stage and stepped slowly up onto the conductor's podium and turned slowly to the orchestra to ask the musicians for their attention, as if we were ready to begin. I paused. No, I couldn't do it. In that expectant silence, I turned to the audience and told them of the struggle going on in my mind. I talked about Beethoven's great cry of yes that was contained in this music and about the sorrowful silence from which it roared. I told them the story of Fulghum, the wannabe conductor who only now understood what he had got himself into. I told them about the real people who played in this orchestra. I spoke of the human triumphs going on in our time that paralleled the spirit of this music. I can't dishonor this man or this music or this spirit, I told them. I asked the real conductor to come and do justice. I turned to ask the musicians to give it their all. And when I turned back to the audience, they had replied to my unspoken request for their consent by spontaneously rising from their seats to stand and be as much a part of the music as they could. Everyone, everywhere in the hall, the mood was yes. The maestro lifted his baton and Beethoven carried us away. And me? Where was the ex-maestro while the music flowed forth? Having never sung in the chorus in this thing, thought I'd just go back and stand in with them. True, I don't know any more about German than I do about orchestral scores. So what? If I could conduct it, how hard could this be? I sang. It was the orchestra's finest night. The musicians were finally united. The chorus and soloists poured out a mighty sound. For a time, all of us in the hall could believe in the power of the human spirit to overcome evil. Beethoven lived. We lived. Nothing grander could be said or done at that moment in our life. At the end, when that marbled music rumbled down the hill of the heart like a landslide, people cheered their lungs out, pounded their hands together, hugged each other, threw flowers, and wept. What a night. What a world. What a life. Yes. So, I want to just tell you a couple more things about Beethoven's Ninth, and then we're going to listen to it. We're going to listen to the Ode to Joy. Whole symphony takes over an hour. We're just going to listen to the fourth movement, which is the Ode to Joy. But I want to tell you a couple of things about Beethoven's Ninth, because I think this is something that we need to put the whole thing into the context of our own times. So the fourth movement of the Ninth Symphony was the result of Beethoven setting to music Friedrich Schiller's poem Ode to Joy, with this message of hope and unity for all mankind. It's why performances of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony have long represented a powerful symbol of opposition to war and tyranny. A tradition has sprung up in many countries to perform the ninth on New Year's Eve, with the part of the symphony that is Ode to Joy being played just after the turn into the new year. The German workers' movement began this tradition on New Year's Eve in 1918, and that tradition continued after the war ended. It's such a powerful piece that in 1985, the European Union adopted the Ode to Joy as its official anthem to express the ideals of freedom, peace, solidarity, and to celebrate the values of all European Union countries share. It was played on Christmas Day, 1989, just after the Berlin Wall was demolished. Leonard Bernstein led an orchestra composed of musicians from the previously separated sides of this city. On February 23, 2023, the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra gave an emotionally charged performance of the Ninth in Warsaw as a response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Yesterday, in Joe's teaching during Dancing with Spirit, he said, a 21st century spirituality emphasizes experience, not belief. And that the three characteristics of spiritual experience are resonance, mystery, and depth. So now let's experience the Ode to Joy. Continue then.